Hello ladies and gentlemen, Panzer here, and welcome to Regiments, a game that's come out very recently on Steam for, I believe it's around $25, $30 or something like that. So it's not a full price title, and it is published by Microprose, who you may remember from way back in the day from a lot of games that they made, classic games back in the day. So they published Regiments, and what this is, it's interesting because this game is sort of in the vein of a lot of the wargame strategy games, like Wargame Red Dragon, WARNO, and it's in that sort of style, but it's sort of dialed back a little bit. It's still very realistic, but it's not as complex, and I feel it's a lot easier to pick up. The key thing about this game is there isn't a multiplayer option. I don't know if that's going to be added later on. This game is not in early access, it is full release. So I think they're going for more of a single player only focus. So as such, aside from the tutorials, you've got Skirmish mode right here. And there's quite a few maps. There's actually quite a few maps. Two different modes. So meeting engagement is where you just have to hold the victory points. And when the time runs out, whoever has more points wins. You've got attack mode where one side has all of the points. There's certain key points on the map. One side has all of them, and another side has to go and capture them. And then you've got mobile defense. So mobile defense is more of a kind of like if you imagine like an escort scenario. And you can see at the bottom here the player setup is changing as I change all of these. So you can kind of have a feel of how that's going to play out. And you have a few rule sets down here that you can change. So you can have modifiers for all accuracy, damage, and so on, that you can modify however you want. You can also have a selection of weather settings and time of day settings, which it's odd because I've never seen this in a lot of those games, actually. It's always been locked at kind of a daytime setting. So having all these options is actually really nice. And I've noticed as well that if you have it as random, the weather dynamically changes over time. So it can start off sunny or cloudy and then become rainy and stormy later on, which is quite nice. So that's the skirmish mode. However, there is also the operations mode, which is very interesting. So what they've done here, and of course you have to unlock the remainder, I presume by completing one after the other. It kind of plays a little bit like a campaign, but it's a bit more dynamic than that. So this is the sort of outline of the operation. You can set your difficulty, and of course you have the same sort of rules that change here. You have a few more here that are specific to this mode, so you can have extra events. You can have more random events. You can have longer phases, which is the battles themselves. So we're going to go and open this up, and I'm going to show you how this actually plays out. So you start off with your basic unit here, and this is the map, so you can see the different stages of the operation. So this whole area here is the entire operation at a glance. And there's these victory points needed to win each stage. What you also have is a resource up here, which is operational authority. So you gain these through certain actions in each phase. And that will allow you to do a number of things. Like you can increase the number of deployment points. These are the resources you use to deploy your units onto the map. Tactical support, so strikes, artillery, and all sorts of tactical aids are there. And you can spend these points to increase the amount that you can actually use at a time. So this will affect, of course, as it says here, point gain and reload speed, so that you can use it more frequently and you can have more of them. Supplies are for refitting and rearming units. In regiments, and I'll show you this later on, but in regiments it's more about keeping your units alive versus letting them get killed, and then redeploying more. If you retreat them and they successfully retreat, they can rearm and go back out. So the supplies here will allow you to do that. So this is a resource that is separate from deployment points. Your units are persistent, so they gain veterancy as you play out through the operation. Some of them start with a certain level of veterancy, but they gain that over time. Of course, if they are killed, then it's a bit more costly at that point when that happens. So these are your strikes here, the tactical abilities that you've got for this particular unit. Now these 3 squares here are where you can deploy more units as well. So this is the starting deck of units that we have, and each one represents an individual platoon. So you can see the strength size, so these T-72M1s, a platoon size is 3 tanks, whereas we've got our Shilkas over here that are 2 at a time. And same with our Mi-24Ds, they're 2 at a time. What you also have here is APCs. And the way infantry deployment works in Regiments is quite interesting as well. It's very different to Wargame in that sense. Right, so let's have a look at some of these units here that we've got. So these are additional task force that we can add on to our main group. So we can spend some of these resources here to add in some. So we can add an armored task force that gives us a platoon of T-55As. They're quite cheap, and the T-55s, although not as good as the T-72s, there are more of them, and they do have a lot more longevity on the battlefield. As a general rule, the sort of rock, paper, scissors effect kind of applies in this game, more so than, or at least more clearly than it does in Wargame, where tanks are going to be weak against infantry at close range, and they're going to be weak against air, but they're strong at medium range against basically every other vehicle. And then on the flip side of that, you have infantry that are very good at close range combat and can kill tanks pretty quickly when they get close enough, but the vehicles are not as good against armor, and they also, while they're not vulnerable to air in the same sort of way that the tanks are, they're still gonna be kind of vulnerable to air attacks regardless. So you can use one of these. I'm going to add the T-55s that we have here. So here with the deployment points, we can actually increase these so we can have more platoons on the field. As it is right now, we actually would spend all of our operational authority to do that. And the number of units we actually have, including the T-55, actually outweighs the amount of deployment points we actually start with. Next up in operations are the events. So you have random events here that, and these are completely randomized every time you play. So the red cards are negative events, and you have to pick one. The blue are the positive events, and gray are, which I don't have any here, but gray is a neutral event. So unfortunately, we got a bit unlucky here with what sort of events we have to play. So with this, we won't be able to deploy 2 of our platoons, and then we'll have to figure it out without it. With supply disruptions, we can't deploy supply platoons, and external supplies won't be available, meaning we can't really resupply our units as easily or at all. So we may have, that could be quite devastating. Bear in mind, all of these are intended to be balanced in a way that you can still play around them. We could take a positive event here, where the phase will be shorter, but we get more supply points and more deployment points. So that allows us to deploy more at a time. This is a very good starting one to have if we didn't have the upgraded deployment points. So I'm going to go with airspace denial here, so we don't have air tactical aids, but we don't have those anyway. And we won't be able to deploy helicopters as easily because they will cost more. So, unfortunately, we do have to pick one, and we can't really get around that, so let's begin. Alright, so now we're in the game, and you can kind of see our objective here is to hold both of these points here. And when we do that, we get 25 victory points each per phase, so that gives us a total of 50 for this phase. The other objectives along here, if we're able to capture them, will give us operational authority, and each one, of course, is worth a different amount. Now, if we were able to capture all of these, you'd see we can actually get a lot of operational authority and make us a lot stronger for the rest of the operation. To get the lay of the map, we're playing as the red forces in this case, so we're deploying from here. This square here is not an objective, but it's a deployment zone. This is also where you can resupply your units. And enemies will deploy from these blue spots here. Unfortunately for us, the objective that we have to defend is held by the enemy, or at least blocked by the enemy. They are currently encircled by all of these points, and all of these points can have any number of enemy units already deployed. You can also see our friendly units are already in defensive positions. And as we zoom in here, you can kind of see the amount of detail in this game, which is quite nice. That these, I believe these are BTRs that are entrenched in here. You got little tank entrenchments here, and I think what we're going to try and do here is try to get some forces to capture these 3 zones here. So we've got Bischofroda, we've got Charlie, and we've got Hill 90. I want to capture these 3. That'll give us some nice operational authority, and then open the way for us to move in and support our team, our allies down here. So let's get some tank forces so we can start pushing through. You can see you can actually pre-deploy them to a specific spot on the map, and they will just move there. I'm gonna get these tanks in place here. So 2 platoons of T-72s. Get our T-55s as well. And then I'm going to support them with anti-tank infantry as well as our riflemen. Okay, I'm just going to pause it really quick here. You can see these markers on the map. This is where artillery has been detected firing. Now, it's only large artillery that can, or large caliber artillery, I should say, that can be detected this way. So mortars, which are short range and fast firing, don't display a marker like that. As you can see, the map looks empty because we haven't actually spotted any enemy units. So line of sight for each unit is actually crucial. So now that our units are here, they've begun sort of settling in. You can actually see, if we click on one of them, you can see they have a hasty position. Now, a hasty position means that they don't have the best of defense, but it does mean that they are getting into a defensive position, but it usually is only when they've just arrived at that spot, so it's kind of an automatic thing. Now we can select them to do an attack move or a hunting move in this direction, and what that'll mean is they'll stop to engage any enemies they detect. However, it's all dependent on how quickly they can detect them. What we can also do with our infantry here is we can switch their mode. So right now they are riding in the vehicles in a mounted fashion, and if we dismount them here, they start to deploy from the backs of the vehicles, and away they go. This slows down the movement of the platoon, but it gives them more firepower. So we can see we've detected an enemy in this direction, and they have stopped to engage them. Now, we are being attacked by anti-tank in that direction, so I'm going to reverse these T-55s back here, so that they're back in cover. And we also have our mortars firing at these guys over here, so that should start giving them suppression. As you can see, this little bar down here, the yellow bar, is their suppression level. So that reduces their effectiveness, makes them less accurate, and eventually causes them to panic. So in a panic situation, they may end up retreating like this. So when they're grayed out, they're retreating. In this case, that unit was totally destroyed, but our mortar position has been discovered, so I'm going to get them to move away now. Now, our recon unit has found the 9P 148s there, and our T-72s are being attacked, so I'm going to double Q there, and they are going to retreat. And then, in turn, I'm going to drop heavy artillery on these guys down here. Now, artillery doesn't necessarily destroy units outright, but it does make a very big difference for suppression, and can cause them to completely stop firing at you. Now, retreating units, once they successfully retreat, they sort of fade away from the battlefield, so I don't believe they have to run away completely, but once they have successfully retreated, there is now a cooldown on that unit there. So if they don't get destroyed completely, you have a very quick cooldown, and they will rearm and refit and come back strong, which is very, very nice. So I'm going to order an artillery attack against these guys as well. And we are going to engage these units right here. And that should get them to hopefully push forward. Now, the tanks are very close to these infantry, which means they will start taking damage. And we don't want that to happen. But luckily, we do have our own infantry platoons in the area, so that's enough to kind of push them back.
Zone captured.
Now that the zone is captured, I'm going to quickly wheel to the right, and we're going to move along. Now, we have our move fast option. So, unlike in Wargame, fast moves do not require the use of roads. However, they will very cleverly avoid rough terrain such as forests and rocky terrain and so on. They will avoid all of those. Now, I can select them to attack move instead, and they will just stop and engage as they go along. Now, again, this is entirely dependent on a unit's line of sight, so if they're not able to fire in that location, then, or see an enemy in that location, they're not able to fire at them. So we can see our mortars now are taking quite a bit of fire, so I'm going to pull them back out, retreat them, and get them to come back again. Same with our shilkas. So that message up there tells us that there is a counterattack coming. And with that in mind, it does appear that we should probably look at reinforcing our position and trying to weather that storm. Now, our units do actually run out of ammo eventually, so our T-72s here are running low on ammo. So I'm going to reverse everybody back. We're going to cancel our attack on Charlie, and we're going to wait to refit. Now, normally one of the only ways that you can rearm and refit a unit is using the retreat function. And when they do that, you redeploy them and they come back stronger. However, what we can do instead is deploy a supply platoon. So supply platoons have only one purpose. They are unarmed, and they can rearm and repair any unit on the field, which makes them quite powerful. Well, until their supplies run out. So we're going to deploy some fresh tanks to the area. And then we're going to use this as a strong point to then go and jump off to these areas here. Now you can see that the allies that we have in this area are already being attacked. But so far it has not been particularly effective, and they are still holding. But we don't want to push our luck too long. Alright, it does appear that we have found some enemy units here. I'm going to drop some heavy artillery onto the anti-tanks, and then we're going to pull our T-72s back. Meanwhile, there are enemy tanks north of Hill 90 as well, so I'm going to try and push forward and secure that. Meanwhile, we've got our infantry now, so we're going to get them to move quickly out to about here, and then we're going to set them hunting forward as well. Now, if you move fast by default, they will load up the infantry automatically, so you don't actually have to worry about that. We got these mortars start firing on Hill 90 here. And if we do capture this, there should be nothing between us and our allies there, and then we should be able to push out from there. So that should be quite interesting. Now, it should be noted that in this particular scenario, these allied units are all entrenched. So they don't move from there, and you just kind of have to work without their support, unless you're defending that area. Right, so our forces are moving into Hill 90, and we should be able to get to our allies in time. Now, the first time I played this, the enemy did actually flank down this way, and once they destroyed that T-55 platoon up there, it was pretty difficult. Once they had got to that point, it was actually quite difficult. And they did overrun the Allied forces quite quickly. Now, our tanks are being attacked by artillery here, and I'm not entirely sure where it's coming from. So, that's not good for us. So I'm going to back the tanks out of here. And I think I'm just going to move our BTRs back as well. Those tanks are taking a beating as well. I may have to retreat these T-72s. I think I might actually do that. Well, it's a nice little feature there, though, that they do pop their smoke grenades when they do that. And then they reverse.
Zone captured.
I think it's just a very nice little feature there. Adds a little bit of realism to it. Alright, I don't know if our artillery is actually hitting the right people. It looks like they are, but I can't quite tell. There's units in the forest there. They're in a prepared position, so that does actually make it quite difficult to clear them out of there. Now, I could actually deploy our Shilkas as a anti-ground unit. They are decently effective at doing that. But generally speaking, you don't really want to risk them in case there are aircraft. But in this case, it could be quite useful for removing infantry because they have very, very high suppression against something like that.
1 minute remaining.
And there it is, the 1 minute warning. So if we consolidate our positions now, and you can also see here that our units are under strength. The red pips here mean that they are, well, not necessarily under strength, but they are the last of the units, so they do not have any reinforcements. So in this case, our mortar unit is down to its last 5. The BTRs for this infantry platoon are down to their last 3. And as you might imagine, that does reduce their effectiveness as well. I think for now we've done pretty good. The friendly forces over here they've taken some damage, but they're still in place, they're still holding. And I think we'll be okay. So that's the end of that phase, and you can actually see a timed breakdown of everything. Quite well here. So you can actually see as well which platoons were completely annihilated as well. So we had a platoon of conquerors there that were knocked out. And of course, these are all the engagements between each one. And you can see there's a lot of blue platoons that got knocked out, but unfortunately we did lose a platoon of tanks. We also lost a platoon of infantry. And definitely not something you want to have happen. But overall, pretty good victory there. So that's the first phase of the battle. So now, of course, we're going on to phase 2 of this battle. And we have some more operational authority points. And with 50 victory points here, we simply need to hold out one more time. You can see here there's an actual time limit. So we can... So, of course, now you can see the next stage is in one more phase. So after this phase, we will be going on to the next stage of the operation. Now, we can spend our operational authority to refill our units, and that does seem like a good idea. We're going to restore our infantry here. In fact, we're going to spend all of it to refill everything. And we can also spend operational authority to upgrade units as well. So our T-55 unit here can be upgraded. And that will give us... Actually, I don't think it gives us anything. At level 3, it gives us an additional mortar unit. So, not the most effective thing. But I do also want to add another unit eventually. I just don't have the operational authority to do it yet. When we do have it, we also can get the command group. Now, the command units aren't used for capturing objectives, as you've seen, like they are in Wargame. But instead, they provide a buff to the abilities of all units within their radius. And it's quite a large radius. So you can normally keep them hidden somewhere where you're fighting and then move them together with the main force. It's quite useful. And definitely good to have, but you don't want them fighting on their own. And of course, at level 3, this particular command group gets a set of T-72s for itself as well. But of course, it also gets the napalm unit, which As far as I can tell, it's very effective against infantry that are in the open. But other than that, it mainly causes suppression. It's not something that really does a lot of damage, whereas heavy artillery can do both. So it's not the most effective thing, but it doesn't take it doesn't take as long to arrive as artillery does. Right, so with that, we are going to go straight back into it. And here we go. Now, before we get into it as well, we do have to pick another event card. And while it is tempting to take Blitz, I think what we're probably going to do is we're going to have to bite the bullet here and take Interdiction, so we're going to go without 2 of our platoons. Again, very unlucky draw this, but it is randomized every single time. Right, so here we are, and as you can see, we have all of our units deployed already, because this, of course, is continuing on from where we left off in Phase 1. So, at this point in the battle, you can see the health levels of all of these guys here. They really have struggled. But, crucially, the objectives that we've captured in the last phase have now been entrenched, so there are riflemen defending these places, which is really kind of neat. So if we were able to capture more, we would have more defensive positions. Now, they're not the most effective, but it's better than nothing, and it saves you having to leave your forces around to go and defend these places. Somewhat. Right, so now we also have because we have our units already deployed, what I'm thinking we're going to do is I'm going to just plan out where we're going to go next. So we do have our friendly forces over here. We still have to defend both of these objectives, and I'm thinking what we could do is kind of push out towards the facility here and then capture the farm. Mainly because the deployment zones are on this side of the map, so I think we might be able to do this and then encircle the clearing as well. And that will allow us to more easily hold these areas. The only downside is this very large expanse down here between the objectives that a lot of enemy units from the deployment zone up here can actually squeeze through. It's very hard to cover a lot of those areas. You can put a recon unit in here, but their survivability is not guaranteed. So with that in mind, I think what we're going to do is we're going to consolidate our forces right here. Well, except for our supply unit, he's going to stay here. And we are going to start moving towards the facility there. So I think before anything, I'm going to get the recon BRDMs up there. And then once our main force is ready to move, I'm going to push them up here and then start hunting the farm and the facility. That's not particularly good for us at all. Alright, I'm going to pull my recon unit back. They're going to go here and resupply. Let's see if we can take this facility and then we'll set up for that counterattack. Although this may very well be part of that attack, so we shall see. Alright, they've dropped some artillery smoke on us. And that's blocking the line of sight for our own tanks, which means that they're able to move in a little closer. And it seems like that was quite clever, actually, from from the AI, that they're using it to screen their infantry getting closer to our tanks there. So very, very smart move from the AI. I was not expecting that. Almost. These trucks just rumbling along, doing little bunny hops. I've only just noticed for the first time, they all have unique numbers. Hang on a second. They genuinely all have unique numbers. You know what I was saying about having unnecessary levels of detail in games? This is one of those games. Alright, there's the ticking, and that's the game. And as you can see, the map is updated, and we're now on stage 2, which has a whole different set of objectives. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is Regiments. And if I was to draw a conclusion in this game, it would be a single-player version of Wargame with slightly more fast-paced action and overall a less complex and serious tone to it, while still being very realistic indeed. And of course, it is relatively cheap for a game of this type, and pretty well polished so far. I haven't encountered any real bugs necessarily. The only real issues I've ever had were with some AI, mainly because the line of sight mechanic in this game does mean that occasionally they don't see units that are directly next to them because they may be blocked by a tree or a building, and they may not engage automatically, but the units are smart enough to do a lot of things automatically as well, especially the deployment of infantry. For example, if an infantry platoon is stationary for long enough, they will deploy their troops and start to in place. And that happens without you even having to tell them to do it. So the convenience of having those kind of features is a lot of quality of life thinking that's gone into this game. But overall, definitely well worth the price. And if you're the sort of person like me that likes to just play against AI in most of these RTS games, this is definitely one to pick up. My name is Panzer, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.